Alright, finished Sweetheart by Chelsea Cain like 3 days ago, but I've been not here mostly. I've been really busy. Anyway, this is a sequel to Heartsick, which I read last year, and it is a thriller about a police detective who spent 10 years trying to catch a serial killer, only for her to ultimately kidnap him, torture him, practically kill him, and then turn herself in order so his life could be saved by, like, the hospital. And this is the sequel. And in this one, the big thing that happens is that she escapes from prison. Although, I mean, that's what it says on the back, which I was like, that sounds insane. How could she possibly escape from, like, a prison? But really what happens is she escapes during a transfer from one prison to another. And, okay, so after I read the first book, I was curious as to whether the second would still have the reporter main character, Susan Ward, and it does. And she's still trying to get published this article about how this senator slept with his 14-year-old babysitter, but then he dies, along with the crime reporter that she considers her mentor at the Herald. And all of this stuff happens, and it turns out all this stuff is connected, but I really liked it. Yeah, I think I liked it more than the first one. It's kind of hard to say, but the first one had a lot of flashbacks detailing, like, Archie, the detective's original imprisonment by Gretchen, the serial killer. Obviously, that's not in this book because she's already told, like, that part of the story. But, so maybe it was, I don't know, it was interesting. And I don't know how long the series is. Like, I know I don't read a lot of detective fiction or a lot of thrillers, but my knowledge of them is that these series can be, like, really, really, really long. So I have no idea how many books are in this particular series. I also don't know if it has, like, a name for the series. But I do want to continue reading it. I think a lot of my motivation, though, is that I want to see Archie become, like, better, because, like, he's so obsessed with Gretchen, and, like, I mean, I thought one of the best scenes in this, where Archie finds out that his partner and his ex-wife, well, not his ex-wife, she just knew about this, but his partner has arranged for Gretchen to be transferred to a prison on the other end of Oregon, so basically so that Archie can't go see her, and he, like, has a breakdown and freaks out. So I liked that. But it just feels kind of like he really does need to just completely cut this woman out of his life, and he won't do it, so it's like, oh god. He also needs to quit taking so many drugs, but I think maybe that'll happen because he literally goes into liver failure in this book, and, like, if he doesn't stop taking pills all the time, he's gonna die. Which he kind of doesn't care, but, like, I think by the end of the book is like, fine, I will do something about this. But the thing is that I think if you actually have the character, like, get better, then that kind of limits maybe the length the series can have, because, like, the sort of, like, point is that the books have to involve both him and Gretchen, so it's like, I don't know, there's a possible limiting factor there, which makes me worry that it's not going to have a happy ending, and that's what I'm reading towards, because, like, I like the angst, and I like all the messed up stuff, but I also like it because I'm hoping there's going to be a happy ending, so I don't know. We'll see, I guess, eventually in the future. Also, I wanted to note that listening to an audiobook, when there are sex scenes, it is like a unique form of torture, because you have to listen to this woman with her kind of weird voice read every single word to you. You're like, I don't want this. No, thank you. Yeah. So there's that. And yeah, so I liked it. I do want to read whatever the third book is, assuming there is one. I also found it fun, of course, again, it's set in Portland and the nearby area, and I'm going to be in that area briefly this summer for a trip, so that's kind of exciting. I'm like, oh boy, I'm gonna get to see all the big trees. Hopefully there won't be a forest fire like there is in this book, but you never know. So, yeah. In conclusion, it was solid, and I do want to continue reading the series. The Gentleman's Guide to Vice and Virtue by Mackenzie Lee. So this is a little bit outside my wheelhouse, but it is historical fiction. So that's not too strange. I guess, you know, maybe it's not too far, but it's a young adult book, and it's from, so okay, let's try this. In June I decided I wanted to read books either who have queer protagonists or queer themes, which I would define as something like talking about what is gender as a concept, for example. But like, I went through my Goodreads TBR and figured out which of the books on there applied, and I could just get physical copies from the library super easy, not have to put any real effort. This was the first one I have finished. Okay, first of all, one complaint. This book does not need to be 500 pages long. Look at how few words there are per page. What is happening? I guess it's because it's YA. Look, I got it because I was like, alright, it's long, but I'm going to be able to read this super fast because it's a young adult novel. And like, it's not like those are tough to read fast, generally. Especially this is supposed to be quite lighthearted, and it is. Yeah, so this book, historical fiction, it's set in the 17 mumble, it doesn't tell you. And it is about Henry Montague, the son of an earl or something like that, who is going on his grand tour of Europe, after which he's going to have to, like, grow up and start actually helping his father take care of their estate and learn how to, you know, take on that role in the future. And he's going with his little sister Felicity, who they're dropping off at a finishing school in Marseille, I think, and his best friend and eternal, like, crush, Percy, who is apparently going to go to medical school in Holland, except you find out that's not what's going to happen. And then, of course, the tour gets derailed pretty early on. I mean, they maybe are in like a month into it, and then stuff starts going crazy. So it's much of an adventure novel, and it's also about how the protagonist is bisexual and in love with his best friend Percy, and how does Percy feel about him, and he's really unsure, and also his dad is abusive, Monty's dad, and it's interesting because, like, the book takes a little while to really dig into this stuff. You're really introduced to Monty as, like, basically kind of this hedonistic kid who's, like, drunk all the time, and then you learn more about him, and you learn, like, why he is like this, and he becomes a better person. Also, he's a little jerk who only thinks of himself, and he definitely becomes a better person. So if you like that kind of story. Now, personally, I feel like this romance really worked for me because it was a slow burn, and it involved pining. I'm kind of one of those boring people who is like, I don't like enemies to lovers. I don't like, you know, any of these other tropes that I hear about a lot in romance novels, which is why I don't read romance novels. But I do like me a good slow burn, pining, friends to lovers type situation. And the fact that it's about a queer character who is dealing with, like, being treated like crap because of that, historically, only adds to it, because I like my angst. Okay. Also, it's funny, their banter is cute. I just thought it was a lot of fun. It was a great book. It has a sequel about Felicity, who I know is Arrow-Ace, so I do want to read that, but I don't know if the library actually has that one. Well, I'll get to it someday. But this was super worth it. And yeah. And that thus begins Pride June. Let's see how many books I can actually read on theme. What's up, jerks? Just finished Venus Plus X by Theodore Sturgeon. Oh boy. This book was a lot. I really liked like 90% of it. And then there was this major twist at the end. And I'm still like trying to decide how I feel. But I don't know if I can really talk about it because I'm not sure I really want to spoil the twist. Which is basically just like, whoa, here's an explanation of what's actually happening. But okay, so the basic premise of the book. This guy, Charlie Johns, gets sort of abducted by this future of humanity people called the Lidom. And, like, they're like, Charlie, we've brought you here to tell you about the Lidom and, like, how we do our stuff. And then, you know, here are your thoughts. Because they kind of imply that they're trying to ask, you know, an ancient human, you know, are we on the right track? So, yeah, that's pretty much what most of the book is about. And Charlie seems like honestly, like I liked him a lot. He seems like a decent person. Okay. Then there's this twist reveal of what's really happening. I'm not going to tell you what it is, but, like, Charlie said some stuff I didn't like. And I was like, oh, fuck off. But, okay. I think this is not an author-endorsed statement, so it's fine, I guess. But anyway, so the idea is that the Lidom no longer have male and female. Everybody is equally capable of, I guess we should say, siring and bearing a child. Okay. So, and they do, and that's how they do it. And, like, also they have some weird future tech. And there's not that many of them, and they live in this, like, dome city thing in their, like, with their, like, crazy future tech, and they have this religion that is around, like, sort of worshiping children in a sense. Like, they don't obey children as gods, but they sort of worship them, and I think it's just honestly related to, like, them worshiping the future. They're very forward-minded. Okay. It is all very interesting. And the thing I liked most about it is that Theodore Sturgeon being like, anyway, here are my thoughts on gender. Except he calls it sex all the time, which is annoying. It's a very conflating of the two things. But then there's, like, this part, like, maybe 3/4 of the way through, where there's just, like, this extended essay on, like, sex differences and how they're fake. And I was like, I love this. But then it turned into this whole weird thing about religion, too. And I was like, I don't understand what's going on. But okay. But you know what? I really did enjoy this book. Like, it really kind of makes you think. Okay, and then there's this other, so that's like most of the book, but then there's all these other chapters. Like, okay, they're not even really chapters. There are no chapters in this book. But you'll get like one extended scene with Charlie and the Lidom. And then you'll get a scene about these other people. And then you go back to Charlie and the Lidom. And it's like back and forth like that throughout the entire book. And there's never really an explanation for what the other scenes are, but how they connect exactly. It's like thematic, I guess, but basically they're just about this couple of suburban couples living, like, maybe slightly in the future because they have some weird tech. And the whole thing is pretty much just about this husband, and, like, every scene has some sort of gender thing happening. Like, the ones I found most interesting, I guess, were, like, in how he treats his kids. But it's interesting because, like, he's thinking about this stuff, but at the same time, then he'll be like, I don't understand why that thing, and it's, like, so obvious. So it's interesting, I guess. I'm glad that Theodore Sturgeon wrote this book to tell me his thoughts on the subject. And it's part of my little, like, let's take June and read queer things. I would classify this as a queer thing just because, like, the entire book is about gender, basically. So, like, I think almost anything that really, like, honestly thinks about this subject pretty much would have to be. Yeah, so, you know what? I'm glad I read it, and then honestly, like, I want to read more Theodore Sturgeon for sure. I have previously read one book by him, More Than Human, about which I remember, like, nothing. But I guess I liked it. I don't know. He wrote some Star Trek episodes, so I believe he wrote Amok Time. So he had some stuff going on. But yeah, like, there's actually a few descriptions of some of his books in the back here. One of them is More Than Human. I read this description and was like, wow, I don't remember any of that. But from it, I'm like, hey, this one book sounds really cool, so I'll read that at some point. But, I know it's so sit down. This was interesting. Yeah, just, you know, there's some shit going on. I don't know. Oh my god. It's fine. See, I think the thing is that the twist kind of, there's this whole bit, and I'm like, oh my god, are you kidding me? Did I read this entire book thinking that this sort of, like, sexless future is supposed to be positive, and then realize actually it's not? But then I thought about it some more and was like, wait. These are still supposed to be, like, people living in this society that is, like, moved beyond these unhealthy preoccupations, and, like, I think, honestly, that they are doing things in a good way, that what they have is good, and that Charlie's ultimate reaction to the truth of it is supposed to speak to the fact that humanity isn't ready. And I'm like, okay, that's cool. And I don't know, I don't want to get into any more detail than that, but, like, because it's, like, not even a long book, as you can see. So, whatever. Glad I read it. It was an interesting experience, and I want to definitely add Theodore Sturgeon to my science fiction author that I read more of list, because, I mean, you know, maybe he can balance out Heinlein a little, because Heinlein's, like, weirdly horny all the time, which is fine, but Sturgeon here seems like maybe he's thought about things a little bit more, you know, like, perhaps not everyone universally wants the exact same thing I do. It was good. Alright, another book completed. The Color of Law by Richard Rothstein. A Forgotten History of How Our Government Segregated America. This is, like, depressing. So I've been wanting to read this for a while, and I finally got this through the library. For some reason, I tried several times to, like, put a hold on it, because it's from a different library, you know, and then they'll send it, and, like, it kept telling me it wouldn't work, and I have no idea why. But finally it worked, obviously, because I hold it in my hands. And I have now read it. This is a really good book. It's nonfiction, and it is about how the government segregated America regarding specifically housing. And his entire thesis is that because part of the, I think it's 13th Amendment, says that the government is supposed to, like, deal with everything, not just getting rid of slavery, but with the legacy of it, basically. That the government partaking in de jure, which means written into the law, segregation of housing, means that they are obligated to actually do something to reverse it. So, yeah, that's his entire thesis, and so the whole book is about him going through all these different government agencies and talking about how segregation was enforced or even created sort of whole cloth in various cities in the country. Like, anything from segregation sort of happened naturally, but then it got increasingly bad in a city like, I don't know, like Chicago, for example, or something like in San Francisco, where there were very few black people to begin with, and so when they moved there during, like, World War I to get jobs at the Ford factory and stuff like that to make ships, segregation needn't have even occurred, but, like, it did. And a lot of this has to do with, like, the federal housing, like, various departments, like HUD, but also some other ones that I don't really think exist anymore, like you know, and all these different programs that existed to help, like, people get houses, either housing because it was war effort and, like, people were moving to a particular area to work at factories, or housing for veterans coming back from the war, or the whole push to get people to live in the suburbs. But it was all focused on white people. Like, white people are the only people who benefited from this stuff. And it's a really well-written book. And I think I would probably recommend listening to it, honestly, just because that always works better for me when it comes to nonfiction anyway. But, like, I guess it's a little dry subject matter-wise. I thought it was really interesting, but maybe it would have been harder to get through if I'd been actually physically reading it. But, yeah, I think it's just, like, it's an important aspect of history, and he obviously, like, it's not just like, oh, this stopped happening when the Fair Housing Act was passed, because, like, it didn't, and he goes into that, and it's all very clearly connected to the modern day. So, yeah, it's legit. I don't know. Yeah, so I've been wanting to read it, and now I finally read it, and I was not disappointed. It is infuriating, and it's really interesting. Yeah. And at the end of the book, he has sort of an FAQ section where he addresses some questions that people asked him when he was researching the book, or when he was telling people, like, what it was he was working on. And that was interesting, too. I'd recommend actually reading that as well. But yeah. This is a good book. Alright, just sliding in right under the rope, or whatever the phrase is, at the end of June, I have now finished Ursula K. Le Guin's book, A Wizard of Earthsea. It's so little. I love books this size. They're so pleasing to me. This is obviously, like, a classic fantasy series, which I've never really been interested in reading, but I've owned this book since high school. So, also, by the way, I was poking around, you know, I like to look at when stuff was written and also when it was printed and stuff, and I'm fairly certain this physical thing was printed in 1984, so it is older than me, so that's fun. Anyway, this was good. I'm not a big high fantasy person, to be honest. Like, there are a few fantasy series that I adore, and then I just kind of don't care that much about the rest of it, especially high fantasy. Like, I'm much more likely, I guess, to end up reading a book like, I don't know, some examples, The Golem and the Genie, or Elif the Unseen, which are both, like, more like urban fantasy, except, like, there are fantastical elements, but that's also set nominally in the real world because, like, you know, it's still the planet Earth. Whereas something like this, it's on a completely different world, which is just, like, a bunch of islands, I guess. Here's this questionably printed map. There's actually a bunch of maps in here. Like, when you go further in the book, like, there's ones that have been sort of zoomed in on particular parts of the larger map. And it's just a fuck ton of islands. And I'm like, who drew this? Alright. Actually, I think they may have been drawn by Ruth Robbins, who is listed back here. I don't know if she also did the cover, which is a lovely cover. I just have some issues with it. Number one, this isn't what Geb looks like. Number two, this didn't happen. I mean, he does outwit a dragon, and it was a really cool part. But, like, the way that he's dressed and the boat that he's on are things that he acquires, like, towards the end of the story, so it's just a little bit weird. It does look very badass, though. Anyway, sorry. This is about the beginnings of the sort of the learning and the training and the journey into becoming the archmage of all the lands, or whatever, that this character Sparrowhawk / Ged goes through. So, like, the book introduces him by being like, he eventually became, you know, this archmage, and he became like super famous, and there's a bunch of songs written about him, but this is the story of like how he grew into that person. So it's a trilogy, I guess. After reading this, I actually am interested in continuing at some point. Le Guin is one of my favorite authors. I just tend to read her science fiction stuff instead of her fantasy stuff. But, I mean, I can be persuaded. She writes very beautifully, but I have more of a interest in reading her beautiful writing when it's science fiction. I don't know why. I think it's just because, like, a lot of sci-fi is not written beautifully, which is fine. But, like, you read hers and you're like, oh my god, this is how it could be. Whereas with high fantasy, I think more people who are writing it put in a little bit more effort to make it sound, like, beautiful. Plus, you know, naturally, every time I read any fantasy book of this type, I'm comparing it to Lord of the Rings, which is one of my favorite books ever, so, you know. Yeah. Okay. So I liked it. I think that's what I have to say. I liked it. It's had, like, there's a bunch of fun adventures that he has in this. The characters aren't, like, terribly complex or deep or interesting, but they have their moments, and, it is also, I think, interesting to compare it to some of her later stuff. Again, what I've read is sci-fi, but I think she definitely evolves as a writer as time went on, because, like, she becomes more interested in writing about women specifically later, but also, like, about different kinds of things. Whereas this is very, I think, it's good, but it seems like typical high fantasy in that there's a young man who has to, like, go through a journey of self-discovery and, like, become this powerful wizard. And, yeah, also he does go to wizard school in this, but if you're a huge fan of wizard school books, this is probably not for you, because he's in wizard school for, like, 3 years, and she just zips through that shit in, like, 2 chapters. Possibly less than that. And I'm fine with that because I don't care about wizard school, but, you know, just mentioning it. But, yeah, I liked it. It was creative, it was interesting, and, I do want to read the rest of the trilogy, at least. There's probably more than a trilogy, but, like, I'll decide on that one later, but there's pictures of the books in the back. So the next one is called The Tombs of Atuan, and I've heard that that one has a major female villain, and she sounds interesting from what little I've heard of her, so, oh boy. Alright, so this was my pick from my mug, so I gotta do that again. Alright, so, we're like halfway through now, because there's 12 books, and that was the 6th one I've read. Alright, guys, I hope this is not long. White Fang. Oh, I forgot I put White Fang in there. Alright, White Fang, which I, at some point, rewatched, like, the initial video I made where I read all the books, and I said it was by the wrong person. Alright. White Fang is by Jack London, which I'm sure everyone may knew. My reasoning for acquiring this book when I saw it at the library book sale is probably the most convolutedly nerdy thing, but basically it's because, I think I've read Call of the Wild, I don't remember, but it's because I was reading, I'm just gonna tell you, a Due South fanfiction, and in it, Kowalski is reading this book, and it's about, okay, so the Call of the Wild is about a wolf, or a dog, I guess, who lives with a person, and then the person dies and the dog goes back into the wild at the end. Like, that's super simplified, because I don't remember it, but this is like the opposite, about a wolf, I think, a wolf dog, who kind of begins to learn how to, like, be with people. So, yeah. Alright. This should be probably a pretty quick read. All the words are big. Alright, I'm excited. See you next month.